أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for granting you and I this existence and for granting us the opportunity to continue these weekly shows here on Enlight Media. We want to welcome you all to our Friday night program, which, as you know, has been given the title of Novel Perspectives. And as always, I'm joined by Brother Hassanain. And today we're also very honored to have joining us two panelists, Sister Anisa Diab, who is a faith-based Muslim health counselor, and also Sister Fatima, who is a decorated humanitarian advocate, social activist, a teacher, professor on various topics such as international relations and geopolitics. So we're very honored to have them. And as you know, tonight's discussion is on the topic of overcoming our weaknesses. And this topic of overcoming our weaknesses and overcoming the various insecurities that we have within us. Inshallah, we'll have a panel discussion with the panelists that are joining us today on why this issue of overcoming our weaknesses and insecurities is so crucial to talk about. And if you really examine the various ills that plague our societies and the various problems that exist in our societies, you'll find that human behavior at a high level, when we examine the various actions and behaviors that we take, they really are the manifestations of our inner reality and character. For example, oftentimes if you find individuals who act very superior to others, or they demean others, if you really examine why they act in such a manner, it's because that's their way of hiding and coping with their inner feelings of inferiority. So overcoming these inner weaknesses and insecurities is a discussion that we need to have, because it's a crucial first step to bringing harmony and peace at a society level. Because if we can't have harmony and peace at the inner level, how can we expect to have it at the family level? And if we can't have it at the family level, how can we expect it to have it at a society or even global level for that matter? So inshallah, this is a discussion that we need to have, and we'll engage in it with our various panelists who come from various diverse backgrounds. And this is really the purpose of the show, Novel Perspectives, is to bring people on from various, diverse backgrounds to share their perspectives on the various important topics. So inshallah, to kick off the discussion, I'll ask Brother Hassanain to make his brief comments, and then inshallah, we'll continue the discussion from there on.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome, everybody. We're honored to have you all. Sister Anisa, Sister Fatima, Brother Amil. May Allah bless you. We'll jump right into the conversation, because this requires a lot of time. I feel that this subject has many layers, and we need to talk about these various layers, because as a community, because we've become very alert these days with reference to the cancer of, and I use the word cancer because it's pervasive and it eats us away. It eats us away in the sense that it eats the society away. Racism eats the society away. And Sister Fatima, inshallah, will describe the difference in the use of the word race versus ethnic groups, for example. These are very important verbiage, because right now we're at a stage where we are recognizing, and this is a wave, if you go back in history, people have risen against racism, but then it has been subdued, it has been covered, it has been taken over by imperialists and those who are very self-centered, who have the benefit of the institutional form of racism. And we need to talk about that. And I'm going to address, particularly once we get going, just as an introduction, the issue called institutional racism. And I want to read a very brief introduction, which I would like to describe it, okay? You have Professor James Jones, who postulates that there are three major types of racism. One is personally mediated, the second one is internalized, and the third is institutionalized. There are three groups, okay? So there's the personal, the one that is carried by a person individually, and that's called personally mediated. The other one is internalized. It's the one where you've accepted it. It's called in psychology learned helplessness. Well, I've come to accept it, and my master, who has enforced this on me, I am now going to help my master maintain that. That's the one that's internalized. And then the institutionalized, the one where it's become pervasive. It's the system. You just cannot challenge it. It's like slavery. In the time of slavery, it was institutionalized and nobody could dare challenge it. And he talks about these three. He says that the personally mediated racism includes the deliberate specific social attitudes to racially prejudiced actions. And when he talks about the internal one, which is really, really sad, is the one where there's the acceptance by members of the racially stigmatized people of negative perceptions about their own abilities and intrinsic worth, characterized by low self-esteem, meaning they have learned through themselves to accept that, yes, I'm a nobody, I'm second class, my skin color is by design. It's really sad when you look at this institutionalized, and it's not only in the United States, by the way. I'll give you a good example in India. This one is more of a socio-political kind of power that has taken over, economic power that has taken over. But when you go into countries like India, where religion has come in and taken it over, it's come in the name of God. These are pervasive forces that are so prevalent on Earth, that on the 5 continents that are inhabited by humans, you will find that this is a very common practice on all the 5 continents. And then the last one he talks about is the institutional one, which is the one that restricts housing, it restricts everything. And it is the most dangerous form. In fact, if you examine it, it's the institutional racism that actually enables the first two. So we should address this today, and we're honored to have with us, experts who are very, very, very much on the front lines talking about these issues. And as an introduction, in Surah Al-Rum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Surah Al-Rum, Allah says, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس ليذيقهم بعض الذي عملوا لعلهم يرجعون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that corruption has appeared to the land and by the sea with the hands of people. في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. And Allah is telling us that when humankind indulges in corruption, it not only causes harm, which is so visible, but it also harms themselves. It's self-harm, actually. Anybody who practices racism may think they're promoting their own goals, but actually they're stabbing themselves. So we want to talk about that, inshallah. Let's get going. Sister Anisa, if you can just introduce, and then inshallah, Sister Fatima also. As by the way, Sister Fatima is in Ottawa, and Sister Anisa is in, I think, in New York, upstate, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Welcome, please.
Thank you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm really proud of the great work that Enlight Media has been doing in terms of having tough conversations, not just around this topic, but I was following along in Ramadan as well, and I'm just so impressed with all the great work. So I'm happy to contribute in just a small way this evening, inshallah. But when we're looking at this topic, in terms of weaknesses and overcoming weaknesses, I think the ability to acknowledge one's weakness is critical. And I actually like to reframe this term weakness as areas of growth instead, because I think weaknesses often have a negative connotation, a kind of helplessness that goes along with that. But where there is recognition of weaknesses, there's an opportunity. And I think we want to be in a growth mindset tonight, inshallah. And I know if you're tuning in, that means that you're already moving in the right direction. The fact is, you can't turn your weaknesses into a strength if you're busy denying its existence, right? So when we look at some of the social weaknesses and the social ills that plague our communities, especially on a systemic level, we see that it starts from within oneself and goes from within to our family, to our community. And so we have to start at the root level and work our way out of this, inshallah. And one of the most rampant viruses that we're seeing even more than the coronavirus is this virus of racism. And I think that inshallah tonight, it's a good opportunity to look within ourselves and even get uncomfortable, get a little bit out of our comfort zone with this issue, especially in terms of how we might be a part of the problem, either individually or as a community, because whether it's intentional or not, we all have weaknesses when it comes to this issue. We all have biases, whether conscious biases or subconscious biases that we have been conditioned to experience. I remember when I was in graduate school and I was studying this topic of, working with clients of different colors, of different cultures and minorities. One of the things that was a requirement for us is not to be colorblind and to really understand and recognize the prejudices of each unique group. Because when you don't do that, when you are in this mindset of, oh, I'm just going to be colorblind and we're all one human family, you don't recognize the unique problems that each group is facing. So having this mindset could negatively affect your connection with minority groups. And I'm definitely not an expert on this topic of racism, but I try to continuously do the self-work and the listening and the learning and the growing with it. And I've recognized there's a lot of different forms of oppression out there, as Brother Hassanain was mentioning. I mean, I know as a woman, I've experienced it. As a Muslim teenager growing up during 9/11, I experienced prejudice as well, especially when I wore hijab for the first time. And I started experiencing questions that really just indicated to me people were looking at me as a foreigner in my own country. So having said that, sometimes we think because we've experienced Islamophobia or because we've experienced misogyny, that we know what it's like to experience racism. But that doesn't mean that I understand somebody else's trauma from that. Because if I wanted to take my hijab off, which of course I would never do, but let's say I wanted to, I could fit in, right? I could go back into fitting in with the majority population, light skin, perfect English, but you can't take your skin off, right? That stays with you forever. So I think we need to be aware of the unique narratives that our brothers and sisters of color are facing. And, it's been beautiful for me to see all these events happening, just the lineup of all of these brothers and sisters who are speaking out on this issue and the events taking place to address the injustices. I remember when, like maybe a decade ago or so, even more than that, it was difficult to even find a female speaker in a lineup at events. And so I think we've come a long way in incorporating women more into having them at the table. But what I hope is that inshallah, after the hype of George Floyd is over, that we'll continue to have people of color at the table addressing these topics, because their voices are so important to the conversations that we need to be having. So inshallah, I'd like to focus more on the psychology of racism, what our role is in addressing it within our families, within the larger community, and how we can be a part of the solution, inshallah.
Inshallah. Sister Fatima, you come from a very diverse background yourself, ethnically, and then also you've lived in, all over the world, in France, Switzerland, Canada. So you have a very diverse background, and I'm sure a very interesting perspective to share on this topic. So please, why don't you share some comments?
Yes, please. Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm honored also to be here with you tonight. Thank you so much for asking me to present today. So it's a topic which is very sensitive and very dear to me. Yes, and you forget also Dubai also. Yes, my background and the fact that I was born and grew up in the country, which was not the country of my parents, France. France is a country which is difficult to be as a Muslim and as Hijabi, also woman, but as North African as well, because there is a huge parallel between what Black Americans are living in the United States and what North African are living in France, actually. This is all is related to the history of colonialism. France has colonized a lot of countries in Africa, particularly North Africa. So yeah, I want to start with one ayah, which is very important for me, to start about the race. This ayah is the ayah 13 of Surah Hujurat, Surah 49. So Allah says in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuhan nasu, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila la ta'arafu, inna akramakum 'inda Allahi atqakum. For me, this verse is very, very important. Why? Because it's all about human being. I truly believe that we shouldn't talk about race because there's only one race. And Allah is what Allah is saying here. He says that the origin of man is only one. Secondly, he says that the only basis of that he made us, he created us as nations and peoples. I didn't give the translation, which is human beings. We created you all from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. Verily, the noblest of you in the sight of Allah is the most God-fearing of you, or consciousness, God consciousness. So Allah said that actually he made us different so we may know each other. And the third and important thing is that if there is any superiority, it's only in the virtues, not about your origin or your skin color. So this is something very important because I want people to know that the word race is was actually the root and the origin of this word bring us in this situation actually. So it's a concept which was developed actually by some philosophers and scientists in Europe. And the idea was to build this concept actually to help actually those nations, those European colonialist nations to justify the colonization. So they said that there are different races and the white race is superior to the other races, the black, the yellow, and the other ones. So this started with this concept actually was based also on an economic interest in the African and Asian territories and all territories. The European colonial powers, they wanted to divide and they share all Africa they split all Africa and they divided between them, especially the French and the British, and they make the empire. They build the empire actually, and they build their wealth on this division of Africa and Asian countries. Why is it very important to not talk about race? Because I always teach to my students, for example, that yes, there is only one race. And if we want to talk about the diversity of humanity, we have to talk about ethnicities, ethnies, or nations, or groups like Allah said in the Quran. He mentions shu'uban wa qaba'ila, which is actually groups or nations. So what I can say about the fact that we can refer to the Quran, and unfortunately those who adore the money, and this is the base also of the capitalism and the power, they have their own agenda, and the agenda was based on this, to divide the people and to show that they are better and stronger. So this is also to justify the oppression they were doing against people. So they start to oppress people, they start to oppress them, they start to enslave them, they start this triangular slave trade between Europe and Africa, and the colonies, the British and French colonies in America, first in North America and then in South America. So this slavery, as everybody knows, lasted for more than 400 years in America. And then it was legalized, institutional. Then after the end of the slavery, we had another system which, as you said, has institutionalized the segregation between Black and white people. And then we will talk about it later. From this Jim Crow laws, we went to a mass incarceration actually system. So where you found that most of the men in jail actually in the United States are Black men. And to go to jail is not only lose your freedom, it's also you lose all your civil rights actually. So this is very, very, very important to say. So I let you.
Yeah. So let me jump in. I know Sister Anisa has jumped off for a few seconds, but you know, when you talk about weaknesses, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. You know, He has made mankind in a state of trepidation, right? And Allah mentions many ways in the Quran and tells us that mankind is weak, you know, da'if, right? And how do you think, just from your research, coming from North Africa, I think your origin is in that region, I believe. Am I correct, Sister Fatima?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I am actually, my parents came from Morocco, and we are also Berber, actually, Amazigh, because as you may know, the indigenous people indigenous in North Africa, they were Berber, Amazigh, not Arabs. Arabs, they come later after what you call the football. Right. Yeah. So there is so many things to say about that, because till now we are in 21st century, 2020. There is a segregation, and sometimes the Berber, the Amazigh in North Africa. North Africa is from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and even you found Berber communities in Egypt, but they still fight for the culture. They fight for the language. They fight for their rights, actually. And since the beginning of the invasion by the Arab armies. So so first of all, having already two origins before being born, before being French. So it's the identity is.
So in other words, you have received at many levels, because of your ethnicity, because of your travels and your exposure, that you have felt, as one would say, the pain in the shoe with reference to the kind of pervasive systemic racism. Because I always mention the word prejudice, when you're biased, when you're prejudiced, and then when you're a racist. What would you say are is the main difference between these three terms?
Yes, I can say that from my own experience, I always felt there was a segregation, there was a prejudice from not being white French. We used to live in area where actually, where I grew up, actually the community was diverse. We were having Spanish people, migrants, Portuguese migrants, Italian migrants. They were white Catholic, but slowly they started to move to other areas, richer areas than our area where most of people from North Africa were living. And you can also, I was feeling already that, because my school was, most of us in the school, we were all from the same background actually. There was no more diversity. This is one thing. Because this was also urban, what they call urban policy from the city, from a lot of cities actually. Like that's how they created actually those suburbs around the big, for example, the big cities like Paris or Lyon or Marseille. You have those suburbs mainly inhabited with people from North Africa or from immigrant, like recent immigration actually. So right. Beginning at school, you can see that there is a difference. We were not treated the same. And when you move to middle school and high school, same thing. Actually, I used to be the only one non-white French in the class, and it was worse at university level. So there is, of course, I think that there is the prejudice. There are bias, and go ahead.
I'm saying, so you felt this level of bias or prejudice. We're going to use this term loosely, but obviously the bigger animal that's the cancer is racism. But when you felt that discrimination, was it primarily with a circle of people that were primarily not from your community of the French background, or was it also carried by your own indigenous community? Because what's interesting is that when there's a racist agenda, then the marginalized support it, and they live by those standards, and they ensure that it's maintained. To me, that's the real core of corruption. When, let's say, for example, I want to control a people, and I'm evil, God forbid, right? And then I make all my, basically my subservient community to ensure that they promote my ideology. That is a very, very dangerous, sick idea. So in North Africa, I know, coming from Tanzania, even the local native Africans, were so affected by this notion of a white person being superior that they would argue among themselves, even when the white person wasn't there.
Yeah,
that they would
you're
sort of
right.
promote and
You're
support.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, I was not at that time as a child and till university level almost. I was feeling the what we said, the racism within what I can say my own community, because actually my own community was most of we were more Moroccan because of a historical reason. But yes, I can say that unfortunately and sadly, most of immigrants from North Africa were from Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia, and Moroccan, they don't like Algerian, they don't like Tunisian. But I can also say that in the same country, people from the north, they don't like people from the south, and vice versa.
But let me jump in. Let me jump in on that comment, and then Sister Anisa, you can just sort of jump in if as you like. Every community, Quran says, "Kullu hizbin bima ladayhim farihun." Every army fights for its cause, right? When you go into every community, we segregate each other on economic lines, on beauty, on privilege, right? Although we are all let's say, of the same culture. So human nature is that we like to divide and conquer each other. But never to the level that I see where it's institutionalized globally. Every community, like if I go to my Khoja community, you'll find that within our Khoja community, we marginalize each other. Which part of Tanzania do you come from? You come from Zanzibar? Do you come from Dar es Salaam? Are you East African Khoja? Are you Indian Khoja? Are you Pakistani Khoja? Are you Omani Khoja? And then we break it down, right? We all do this. But I haven't seen it at that level of institutionalization where it has become the grand master, where you find, let's say, the Tunisian doesn't like the Algerian, for example, but that's not the rule of play around the world. The world doesn't support the Tunisians against the Algerians, but the world supports the white against the black. Sister Anisa, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I want to add to the conversation. So I am actually half Tunisian. My dad is from Tunis. My mom is a convert to Islam. And I have never heard conversations in my home around Tunisians not liking Algerians, but I didn't grow up there. I used to spend summers there, and I saw a lot of what you're talking about with, oh, this person's from the South or whatever. But I like what Brother Hassanain was saying about that. I think we need to talk about racism. That word needs to be honed in on, because there is this universality of oppression when it comes to white superiority on a global level. And you witness it within families and conversations that are being had. You witness it in the systemic oppression that we do see as well. But what I'm hearing from my brothers and sisters who are people of color is, when we don't talk about racism, we're doing a discredit to our families. We're doing a discredit to our children, because when we have these conversations, we help to shape their worldview on this issue rather than just leaving it up to them to decide for themselves what they think based on their peer relationships or what they hear in the media. And so I think that this is a conversation that needs to be had, and we need to talk specifically about the white superiority piece. I do understand, again, on the global level, I've traveled to Tunisia. I've seen exactly, Sister Fatima, what you talked about in France with the Arab ghetto area. You know, I've been to Paris, and I think that traveling is a wonderful way to break barriers. And if we can encourage our families to travel together, to see the world, to see the realities of what's actually happening, it opens your eyes. So my mom is a convert to Islam. You know, she's white American. I have Christian grandparents. You know, my family originally came from Spain on my dad's side of the family, from Andalusia. They were kicked out during the Spanish Inquisition, 1492, forced to go to North Africa and start a new life there, lived among Jewish people in harmony, worked together. You know, my husband's from Lebanon, and it's wonderful to when you have the experience of getting to know people from different backgrounds, and to hear, to face have you know, no barriers in terms of being able to talk about your issues, to talk about hijab, to talk about the religious barriers that may be present for other people. But when you go through it yourself and you see through your own perspective, through your family, through your traveling, the narratives of others, it really does help to destroy walls and destroy those barriers that a lot of other people would put up. And I think what comes to mind for me is in Surah Al-Rum, when it says in verse 22, it says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَاتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالِمِينَ. So among his signs is the creation of the heavens, the creation of the earth, the diversity of your languages and your colors. Verily, that is a sign for people of knowledge. So Allah is describing our colors as his sign, as his ayat, as his beauty, you know, part of the beauty that he's created. So that means we have to talk about the colors. We can't be blind to
in other
that.
words, we can say that the diversity and the views and the various languages are our strengths, not our weaknesses.
Right.
And notice how Shaitan has taken our strengths and divided us and used it as a point of weakness. So, you know, while people say, you know, you'll find that the supremacist who wants to eradicate diversity, people like you know, like Hitler, for example, right? You find that their notion of diversity, getting rid of that, to them is the strength, when in fact that is the weakness. See? So when we talk about racism, and I think you used a very good point, Sister Anisa, when you say, let's not use the word weakness, let's use it as a word of opportunity, right? Because we should always, every one of us should say, and we should carve it on the wall, you know. And I always say this to every person that I'm able to impact, including myself, of course, is that carve it on the wall and say, I refuse to be a victim. I refuse to be a victim, right? And you find that the strength that God has given us with the diversity that we have, you'll find Shaitan, the evil forces of the satanic forces, uses that as a weakness. So people say, oh, you know, that's a darker skin, that's the weaker race. When diversity and the collection of the hues is the strength. But here's my critical point I want us to focus on. All of us can jump into this. You mentioned, Sister Anisa, we need to talk about racism, and I totally agree. And thank God this is finally coming out. But you know, so many lives and so much blood has been lost for thousands of years that we're talking and talking and talking. And I got a text message from a sister, you know, who was a Black sister who is a philanthropist. And I can sense her energy. And she's telling me, I am fed up. We're talking so much, but I'm afraid. Will this die again and it'll go back to its old ways? So I think our conversation in these dialogues, the brief moments that we have, is how do we shatter institutional racism? One suggestion that was brought forth, and we can talk about it, is to institutionalize diversity and love through the divine presence, meaning that we should establish firm institutions to counter institutional racism. In other words, we should not eradicate them and leave a void, because the minute we leave a void, the evil forces will come and put another statue in it with a different color. But Amil, I think you wanted to make a quick point.
Yeah, just to continue with this discussion, and we, back in line with tonight's topic that we titled, overcoming our weaknesses. And Sister Anisa, you made a great point, like Brother Hussein just mentioned, that we should be about, viewing as an opportunity. Weaknesses are an opportunity for growth and for progress. But really, why we titled it this way is because, as you mentioned in the beginning, that really the root cause of many of these societal ills and behaviors, such as racism, they have an inner root cause, right? And these weaknesses we have, these are things that Allah has created us with. For example, in Surah An-Nisa, Allah tells us, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُخَفِّفَ عَنْكُمْ وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. Right? That Allah desires that He should lighten your burdens, but man is created weak. So we know we have weaknesses within us, and these are things that we need to talk about, and these are things that we need to address. And with this issue of racism, Sister Anisa, you mentioned that you wanted to discuss, the psychology of racism. I think that's a great place to start in terms of, from a mental health perspective, from a psychological perspective. In your experience dealing with your various clients from diverse backgrounds, what do you think is, the psychological, the roots of these issues of racism, bigotry? What inner weaknesses sort of are the cause of these various societal ills?
So that's a good question. And let's just start by defining what racism is, right? Because it's different from other forms of oppression, like misogyny or xenophobia or Islamophobia, which are all important to talk about. But when we're talking about racism, we're talking about prejudice, we're talking about discrimination directed at somebody of a different race, a belief that one's race is superior to that other. And it's usually linked to specific features. So skin color, like Brother Hassanain was talking about earlier, when you saw what happened with the Holocaust, people were targeted if they didn't fit white skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, that whole Aryan race mentality. So it's usually connected to skin color or specific physical features. But when you look at the psychology behind racism, there are a lot of different reasons why it exists. And research talks about a lot of different factors. But first of all, it's a deeply spiritual issue. It's a deeply moral issue where it's part of the human condition that Prophet Adam alayhi salam, first faced when Shaitan refused to bow down to him because he was made from, clay and Shaitan was made from fire. And so we see the fingerprints of Satan here with this issue where he is determined to lead humanity in that same direction of arrogance. Whether it's when we say I'm better than so-and-so because they're from this village and I'm from this village, or I'm better because I have more money and this person is poor. This arrogance is really the downfall of Satan, and it's our downfall as well. So it's a deeply spiritual issue. It's a deeply moral issue, but it's racism from a psychological level. It's about power. It's about control, and it only benefits those who wish to dominate other people. First of all, it gives people a sense of superiority, which in turn allows them to hoard resources, seems to them to justify taking over someone's land, exploiting them. It's also a faulty defense mechanism. So people are scared, it's projected in 2044 that white people are no longer going to be majority in this country. They will lose that status. So there's a fear that a certain group of people are going to take over. And the response is to respond with prejudice, materialism, physical retaliation, violence. It's also a way to avoid feeling low self-esteem and insecurity. Because when people you look at people who are narcissistic, for example, many of them have very deep-rooted insecurities, low self-esteem, and they try to make up for that and compensate for it by projecting blame on other people, by treading on other people's lives. And so those who are racist do tend to have very low self-esteem, and they will try to identify with a majority group to make up for that. But what we see with those who are psychologically healthy is they don't have a need to self-identify or define themselves in direct conflict with other people. And one of the most destructive forms of racism you'll see is those with low self-esteem, those with narcissistic traits, projecting their own insecurities onto another group of people, especially to avoid responsibility and blame, as we've seen, quite a bit under the current administration in this country in many different ways. But, where does it come from? Where does it start? First place is it starts at home. It starts from attitudes of family members, peer attitudes, the way that we're socialized. It's true that no child is born with prejudice. That is true. But we also don't say that children are colorblind. We have research to show that even in infancy, they show preference for caretakers that look similar to them, and that even by the time they're 3 years old, they start to be selective about which group of peers they play with. So it's actually recommended to begin having conversations with your kids about race as early as 3 to 5 years old, at least by 5 years old. And I think the fear is with a lot of parents is, if I have this conversation with my kids, am I going to start to make them racist? Am I going to put these ideas in their head?
Could we jump in just briefly for you to continue this conversation? That's an excellent point you make, that when a child starts to exhibit that kind of behavior of preference over others that look different, because there's some evidence on the flip side that actually that comes because of the nurturing, not the nature.
Right.
Meaning that because of the family having that kind of an attitude, that the child picks up on that. In other words, could we say that assuming the child does have a preference, could we say that when the child does have a preference, that we should encourage it, or should we immediately nip it in the bud? So if, for example, if I have a brown-skinned person, a black-skinned person, an Asian person, let's say, right, and a white-skinned person in my house, and I have a 3-year-old, and my 3-year-old, let's say, is brown skin, and my 3-year-old is leaning more towards the brown skin. What should we do in terms of eradicating this perpetual? Because we could argue that behavior is probably because of fear, and the child is now looking for similar ones because they're afraid of dealing with the different ones. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I think it's important to address that dynamic. So if you notice your child gravitating more towards certain people, having conversations about, I noticed that you seem to gravitate towards Muhammad or whatever, and Muhammad is the same skin color. What about, Ali over there? I noticed he was kind of by himself in the corner. You didn't really seem to go up to him and play with him, and exploring, just open-ended questions, trying to explore what was going on in your mind. It might be a racial thing, or it might just be, well, I prefer to play with Muhammad because we have similar personalities. But I think that idea, that whole concept of having friends in the house from all those different cultures is already beautiful in and of itself. And it's not something you will often see with parents, having play dates with people who are, parents and kids of all those diverse groups. But that's important to expose your children as well to other cultural, groups and other racial minorities as well, in terms of their friendships. So we model that for them as well.
Sister Fatima, what do you have to say?
If I can jump in that, because I have experienced teaching to kids from grade 6 to grade 12, and I can say of my experience that I can see that actually the way how the students, they react to the topic we're treating, like, for example, racism or colonialism, I can see perfectly that it's not the words they use when they challenge me, for example. It's not their words, it's the words they hear at home, for example. And I was wondering, because you're saying, Sister Anissa, that so it's good, and it has to be done like that, to let the kids gravitate around the people from diverse origins and skin color and everything. But it's not always the case. It's very difficult to do it, because first, the parents, the families, they have to be, they have to want it first. And also, it's about the neighborhood, where you live in, where you put your kids, in which school. There's no, sometimes you don't find the diversity in the school. It's all, as I said, you will find the same community going to the same school, and same also for the high schools or even universities sometimes. So it's very difficult to let the kids or the youngs mix with other communities. This is from my own experience. And I was really wondering sometimes if those bias, they were not taking place at home, for example. I'm 100% sure that the kids, they won't grow like that and have this like racist mentality. Some of them they have, because I was sometimes very upset and sad to have some like 14 years old student who was having a very, very racist discourse. And it was really painful to see that he's at this young age, he was having this kind of thinking, and and this happened in Dubai. So it was a French high school in Dubai. Can you imagine that? So those people, they hate, I can say, Arabs and Muslim, and they're living in Arab and Muslim country, and they hate them, and they have this speech at school. So I have to deal all the time with that. I also have to deal sometimes, to be honest, also, I had some students, they were negating, about Holocaust, because they have to study also Holocaust. So even those, I was exposing them, those kids, and I try to understand, to ask them, why do you say that? Why do you believe like that? But sometimes I have to meet with the parents and straightforward understand that this came from home. It didn't come from outside, because even in Dubai, the communities, they don't mix. You have the white European or North American people living in the same areas, and then you have the other one living in the same area, and you have this segregation depending on your origin and depending on your wealth, the poor ones and the rich ones. So yeah, it's not easy, but
So it's a complicated area, obviously. When we're targeting we know the causes of racism, it's insecurities, right? That's, I think, that's a well-established fact. And some of it is developed at a very early stage in our growth as children, right? And it's socially enhanced, and we build on those institutional, racist ideologies, right? One of the complicated areas which really stunned me, I don't like to talk about it too much, is that there are people who tell me, well, I'm not a racist. I love all colors, but I'm a pragmatist. I'm a utilitarian pragmatist. And practically, when we look at the opportunities on Earth, for example, people who migrate to Western countries from war-ridden countries, for example, what are they coming for? Well, safety. They're coming for security, and they're coming for economic growth, and they're coming for a brighter future. Let's put those four pieces of the puzzle forward, right? None of those really delineate any form of racism. They're all looking for survival. They're looking for growth. It's very ironic when this level of institutional racism reaches a level where a person technically is colorblind, but because the institutional system opens roadways to certain colors of people, that now people are making selective choices to associate with those colored people, the lighter skin, the white people, because more opportunities come their way in that direction. It's really a very sick system. In other words, for example, even among the Arabs, among the Africans, among the Europeans, among the French, you'll find that, for example, the bourgeois among the French, right? They will remain with the wealthy, because that's where opportunities are. Their daughters will marry the rich guys, and the rich guys will marry the rich daughter, because they want to inherit from each other. They will even discriminate the poor people, right? Though they are the same ethnicity, for example, right? So it would be very interesting for us to talk about that reality. People have told me, I really like that black girl. I really want to marry her. I think she's very beautiful. Somebody telling me this, imagine. I say, why don't you? If you like her character is good, you should. And he gave me this the kind of answer I never thought about, but it's staring at us. And I think this is where people the ones who are receiving the racism, also see that this person says, well, if I marry this person, I'm going to go through a lot of problems socially, economically, you see. People are going to discriminate me. They're going to now lump me with this problem. And my children now technically will be mixed. And you know how now, because even if you have 5 generations back, you have one person who has African origins, or to use the word African, I mean, really, the whole human race, 8+ billion people, are all of African origin anyway. If you study, even when you study, for example, the mitochondrial Eve theory, where the mitochondria is matrilineal, which is inherited only from our mothers, and they've done studies to show that the entire human race originated from this continent. But look how silly and we are that we use the word African, blah, 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 third class, whatever, right? But what I'm trying to say is that this is really sad when you look at the institutional level, where a person may reach a level of not really being selective in color, but as a survivor, they will choose one over the other. And the worst part about that is that in order for them to succeed on that pathway that they think is the right way, they have to condemn the other side. I think that's the ugliest part. When you condemn, promoting your own culture, promoting your own people, promoting your own nation, promoting your own food is a beautiful thing. I think everybody should do that. It's when you demote others that I think is the ugliest thing human beings can ever do.
One point, Brother Hassanain. Yeah. Sorry, Sister Fatima, go ahead.
Okay. No, it's okay. Yeah, I just want to jump on what you just said, Haj Hassanain. It's very important that to give back humanity, to humanize actually people like Black people after all what happened and all this history of slavery and injustice and oppression. So they became like some of our people in the world who are fighting against injustice and oppression. We have to give them their humanity. So we have to raise awareness. We have to educate people. It's very, very important. And I know that I always say that the history has to be the truth history, not the history of the winners, of the white supremacists, the truth one, the one who shows what happened exactly, where and how. And I'm it's very important now, for example, that they are removing some status from colonial and racist, very well-known people. Just to come back to what I was saying, yes, this dehumanization has to stop, and we have to rebuild actually another system. As I said, we have to ourselves to go out from our comfort zone. We have to educate, and we have to be
willing to sacrifice.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to pay that price. We look at all heroes. That's exactly what they did. Am
exactly.
I right? Get out of our, I think the key point you made, Sister Fatima, get out of our comfort zones.
Exactly.
Because that which suits us may be the cancer that's spreading. But Brother Amil, you wanted to say something. Your audio is off.
All right, yes. I was going to volley on the point you mentioned, about how you met a brother who wanted to marry an African sister. And he mentioned that, he was not going to do that because of from a pragmatical perspective, he's going to face a lot of, social backlash and et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's very interesting when you look at the history of our imams and the women that they chose to marry. I think it's very interesting how they strategically, several imams married, African women. And
more than 50% of them.
Right. And in fact, if you look at the ethnic composition of the 12th Imam, Imam Mahdi Ajjallahu Ta'ala Faraja, it's actually vast majority is from African descent, because various of his, grandmothers are of African descent. And the Imams used to get, because they were not only, from the perspective of the Imams, not only were they, representatives of God, but even in Arabia, these are people from the tribe of Quraysh, one of the most honorable tribes in the area. And so people even used to come and, mock them. Why are you marrying, female African slaves? And they used to give beautiful replies. For example, Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, who married a female African slave, right? A man comes to him and he's mocking him. He said, you are a high man of high status from Quraysh. How do you marry a female African slave? Demeaning the wife of the Imam. And the Imam gives him a beautiful reply, manifesting that verse of, 49:13 that Sister Fatima brought up from Surah Al-Hujurat. And the Imam tells the man beautifully that لا شرف أعلى من الإسلام ولا عز أعز من التقوى. That there is no honor, greater than Islam, and there is no, izzah status, status and value than this value of taqwa, meaning it's at the character level, it's at the piety level, not the physical level. And we've talked a lot about this problems of institutionalized racism and the various ills that we see in our societies. But Sister Anisa, I think it would be great if you would continue the discussion, from the root level of the root cause of racism. I think one of the most profound root causes you mentioned, is fear and also a greed. It's like the discussion of predestination and free will. If you look in history, the ones who promoted predestination the most are those who were greedy for power, because they can use that as a tool to control the majority and say, if God didn't want me to kill you, to steal your property, etc., then he would have stopped you. So they used their fear and their greed to control the majority. And the racism is the same thing. In fact, if you look at Europe, it's the most resource barren land on earth, and Africa is the most resource rich land on earth. So it's this fear of insecurity that's really stemming from this. But go ahead. Yes.
What I think the worst thing you can take away from someone is, in dealing with this issue, is actually education. Because when you educate people about racism and people really get to know who this person is, what their culture means, what their language is about, what their history is about, there are no barriers anymore. You're not just blindly following what happens on Fox News or whatever. And the problem that we're seeing is there was so much historical trauma done to these people. I mean, if we look in the US alone, there was 246 years of slavery for Black peoples, 89 years of segregation, right?
And by the way, that slavery, they used to cut their fingers off if they even learned the alphabet.
Right. And see, that's the worst thing you can take away from someone. 1954, that's when they finally, stopped the segregation. We think it was a long time ago. 1954 wasn't that long ago at all. But the problem that we're seeing, and it's still continuing today, is the redlining of different neighborhoods where people who were Black, they were not allowed to live in certain neighborhoods. And banks, if they went to the bank and they asked for a loan to buy a house in a nice neighborhood, they're denied, just automatically denied. And we're still seeing that today, where our educational system is being funded by property taxes. Why? It should be independent of property taxes. But people know, when you take away somebody's equal access to education, you take away their funding, you take away their resources, you take away their power. Once you educate somebody, once that person has wisdom and knowledge, that's the most dangerous thing, and they know it. So I think that's where the real systemic oppression lies.
Sister Anisa, you brought up beautifully, Sister Fatima, inshallah, you'll jump in right here. But, you brought up beautifully about how education is, denying access to education is one of the most, unjust and oppressive things we can do. Because ignorance, if we're to be frank, ignorance is the root cause of many of these ills, such as racism and bigotry. And of course, we know we have simple ignorance and compound ignorance, right? Simple ignorance is, of course, I know that I don't know, and hence I'm seeking to learn, right? I know I'm ignorant, but many people unfortunately, they suffer from compound ignorance. They don't know, and they don't even know the fact that they don't know. They don't understand the other side. They don't understand, like when we had Brother Mahmoud last week, Abdul Rauf, and Brother Hassanain asked him, when you kneeled for the anthem, right, and you didn't want to stand for the American flag, how many people actually came to you and asked you, why are you doing this? And his answer was, not many. I just got death threats, condemnations, etc., because people are not willing to understand the other side. They don't know what the other side goes through, and they don't even realize that this is an important thing to understand and to talk about. But Sister Fatima, go ahead. You want to say something?
I believe truly in the education. But what I noticed, what is very important also, is even if someone has access to education, what about the curriculum? I noticed something very important, is that even what is taught actually is not enough. You have a lot of part of history which are not taught. You have a lot of facts, history facts which are not taught. And for example, if you go to geography, geography was used also. If you take the Mercator map, for example, the Mercator map puts America in the middle of the map and make North America bigger than South America, for example. This is only to show that we're bigger, so we're better. So even if you education is very important, but we have also, as citizens, we have also to ask and about the curriculum and make some courses mandatory for the kids, and the academia. I discovered this recently in North America, that in academia, we don't have anymore some courses about the indigenous, for example, about the slavery in North America, and especially in Canada also. And this has to be addressed also. It's very important. I just want to finish myself with one quote from Malcolm X, who said that you cannot separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. And for me, it's echo what Imam Hussein alayhi salam was saying: be free in your life. So the most important, yes, education, and to fight injustice and oppression for the freedom of everybody, whatever is your ethnicity or
yes.
Yeah.
Sister Anisa, before you go ahead, we're close to wrapping up the program. Inshallah, you'll make some final concluding remarks. But Sister Fatima, you mentioned Malcolm X, and I just wanted to mention one incident from Malcolm X's life where when Malcolm X was sent to prison, and it relates to our conversation on education. When Malcolm X was sent to prison, he was in jail. One of the things he did that really made him such an influential and prolific speaker later on in his life was he focused on education and literacy, right? He began reading books. They say that he used to copy the dictionary word by word in order to, increase his vocabulary, to increase his literacy. And he himself states that after he began to teach himself to read, after he began to read all of these various books that the prison had, he said, I had never been so free in my life. Despite the fact that he was in prison, I had never been so free in my life, because education, learning, literacy really opened up his mind to various realms of existence that he didn't even know about. But Sister Anisa, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I these are all really valid points. And I think as a teacher, as someone who's an educator, you have a really unique opportunity to shift mindsets here. And when you come across curriculum that is inappropriate, to choose either alternative materials, or at least to say, look, I have to teach you this, but this is the other side of this, or why don't you all research the other perspective on this? Like, I remember, there was a moment where, and I grew up in a public school system, and many of my classmates were African American, people of color. And there was a situation I'll never forget in my life, where, someone in the class had threatened to shoot Martin Luther King. Such an awful thing to say. I have never seen a person since that time so angry. My teacher shut that room down. I mean, was at the top of her lungs, like, we need to sit and talk about this. And, how is this possible that, you all can sit here and say such a thing? I have never seen a teacher and educator so serious. I never forgot to this day. So you have more power than you think in the classrooms. And I think it's real moments like that where you hear something that a kid is saying and you challenge it, and you get everyone to listen and to see the passion in countering the injustice. That's where your power lies, because you can only do what's in front of you, right? You can't control all of the systemic issues, but you can try to speak out, you can try to educate, you can try to advocate as much as possible through protesting, through donating to organizations, to making changes in your home with your family. So yeah, I feel like there's still so much more to talk about with this.
I think the combination of what you're both saying is, you emphasize the importance of education, and that's hitting it right on the nail. And Sister Fatima, making sure, saying that the education, which is very, very important and central, should be validated. And then your response, very appropriate. Yes, it should be. And every one of us as pedagogues are responsible to ensure that the kind of the message that reaches the child should be filtered in positive moral values. So we all agree on that. The bottom line, I think, our importance is precisely to impact each other. I'll give you a quick example. We had a young boy who used to work at our camp, and he was about 15, 16 years of age, and used to come and help out in the construction and so on. And we became good friends. So I started teaching him many things, construction work. And so when he was building the camp, then he said to me, I'm going to school to become a teacher. I said, oh, that's great. His name is Justin. He used to work actually for Wise. And then he migrated to, he's now in Texas. So, and Justin is from the white race, from the white ethnicity, to use the right word. And what's interesting is that I said to him, oh, you're going to become a teacher, so you're going to impact lives. He said, yes. I said, good. Can I suggest some books for you to read? He said, I would love it. Do you have a library? I said, yes. So at the camp, I had a book by Howard Zinn, History of the United States and Its People. And I said, what are you studying to be as a teacher? He said, social studies. I want to teach social studies. I said, good. Here's the book. You should read this. This is very important. Get an alternate perspective. People like Howard Zinn, who really sort of exposed the evils of people like Christopher Columbus and all the terrible things that were done during the slave period, And he finished the whole book. And then, subhanAllah, he was one of our teachers, teaching social studies. And he told me, he said, that book, as one book, impacted me so much that I make sure I teach those aspects of history to correct what is being taught incorrectly in public schools. So to sort of add on to this conversation, every one of us makes a little ripple, right? And we never know. This is how we build institutions. One brick at a time. So it's very, very important. And by the way, as a final point, when that person who wanted to marry that girl and said, I'm afraid of this and this, I said, what faith do you, what faith do you follow? He said, I'm a Muslim. I said, as a Muslim, the world is attacking Islam. The Islamophobes are everywhere. So are you going to change your faith too in order to now secure your future? He said, no. I said, well, that's precisely the point. Fighting racism is Islam. Eradicating bigotry is Islam. Imam Hussein went to Karbala precisely for that reason, to fight the indecencies, right? The Umayyads wanted to make indecency an institution. You see? So this excuse that people say, oh, if I go here, I'll be castigated, I'll be marginalized. Say, okay, then give up your faith, become a chameleon and change your colors. That's not how the world works. So for us to as Sister Fatima mentioned, to sit in our comfort zone, and I look in the mirror, I say, oh, my skin is light, so I don't have to work on that. So let me promote that. That is equivalent to shirk. That is equivalent to kufr. This is exactly what Iblis did. So our obligation, if we're going to eradicate these kinds of illnesses that are prevalent in society, especially at the institutional level, we should stand up and fight for this, for humanity, not for what suits us and comforts us. But Sister Anisa, I think you wanted to make a point also?
No, I think that's very well said. And I mean, just in conclusion, I know that there's a lot of challenges that are happening during this time, but when, in this rush to return back to normal, I think we need to take this time to consider which parts of normal are actually worth rushing back to. And the fact that we've been sitting here reflecting on this, and this is an issue that has gained so much momentum, that you see not just Black people's protesting, but white people joining in at the risk of their life with this virus. And you see it affecting the whole world on a global level. Like Sister was saying, they're tearing down statues, and everyone resonates. I mean, this man has become a symbol of injustice and a symbol of hope for people who are struggling. And I think that we've got to realize every day there's going to be a George Floyd, even when this hype is over. So inshallah, we can just keep this momentum going, keep speaking out, do what we can, like the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family said, to speak out, to change it with our hands. And at least if we can't do that, then hate it, in our hearts, and try our best to recognize that this is a problem and it's not going to go away. It's not, and we have to be part of the change.
Allah in the Quran says, "Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim." Allah doesn't change the state of a community until the community changes themselves first. This is proof positive that this conversation we're having, and having you all present here and to share your wisdom and your experiences, is not just about talk. I'm not interested in doing these programs where we're just going to talk and make people feel good. I believe every one of us needs to do at the individual level to define ourselves and stand firm with what we believe. I remember in the university at that time, people used to say, "What are you?" I said, "I'm a Muslim," and Islam was being attacked, in the early 80s. And I said, I'm a Muslim. And, oh, you know, are you the terrorist? I said, go ahead, let's talk about it. I'm going to face you face to face because you are trying to brand this in an evil way. And I will not allow you to institutionalize this. I'm going to challenge you, and I'm going to bring it out to the public and let the public have an alternative opinion, because we are not going to become victims. This is at the spiritual level, at the identity level. And it's interesting how majority of the human race suffers what we call identity crisis. You can see it in the university. First year of university, most of them, they want to join fraternities and sororities so they can don themselves with these massive Greek letters, and they can tell people, I belong somewhere. And people used to ask me that question. I said, I belong somewhere too, but I don't need the Greek letters. And I don't need to wear the big titles called Islam. My identity is in my character. I need to carry myself as a Muslim. This is my identity. If you don't like it, you know, that's fine. You know, we will agree to disagree agreeably. But, and I think we have to empower, and it comes in both directions, you know, and I think the frustration of the Black population, especially in the United States. I mean, I've had Africans telling me, we are safer in Africa than the Black people in America. We're safer. And if you look at incarceration, Sister Fatima sent me something that was beautiful, which Netflix did. It's called 13, I think.
Yeah, 13. Yeah, it's referring to the 13th Amendment, actually. Yeah. Yeah,
the 13th Amendment. You should watch it. It's on Netflix.
Yes.
It talks about how the marginalization of the Black and Hispanic community to fill the prisons, and private companies are making money. And then when we talk about all men are created equal, you know, when you go back to constitutional law and see that the founding fathers, in their mind, what they meant was all white men are created equal. That was actually what they said, but they didn't write it, you see, and it's pervasive.
It's like exactly the same in France when we have this liberté, égalité, fraternité.
Yeah.
Liberty, equality, fraternity, but not for everybody. Actually.
What liberty? They don't, in France, they don't allow women to wear niqab. The other day I was in Dearborn, I saw sisters in niqab. I said, wow, they feel like they're in paradise, because now everybody's become a niqabi. And suddenly France has this dumb law. Even people like Trevor Noah exposes it, you know, on his show, where he talks about how stupid. I mean, to show you fear on an institutional level of a country that is so afraid of Islam, when France it's got a massive Muslim population. And then they talk about égalité, liberté. It's all just, as they say, لِمَا تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Why do you say that which you don't do?
Exactly.
Mr. Fatima, I think earlier you wanted to make a final point before we concluded the program.
Yes, I was going to tell you to watch this very, very interesting documentary 13, and you can see how from this issue actually is from slavery to mass incarceration, and you can see that everything is about business, everything is about money, and we cannot. We have to stand and we have to do something. We are all responsible in this, as you said, Hassanain. And if we don't do anything, we are a part of the problem also. So let's be a part of the solution. Yes. Each of us at all levels, parents, kids, teachers, and all of us in different communities. Let's work together. And let's our youth also to be involved in politics. What I mean by politics to take their rights, to go to vote, to be candidate also, because we don't have to wait for anybody to give us our rights. We have to fight for them and to fight for others, not only for us.
Yes.
We are one. And be happy and free.
Yes.
The other ones are not free or happy, at peace.
Sister Anissa, I think you wanted to mention a final comment.
Yeah, sorry, just one more thing, because you mentioned the prison system and, you know, the fact that they're being exploited, and that certainly is the case. But other thing we haven't talked about is that 20% of inmates have mental illness, severe mental illnesses, or dealing with addiction issues. And so even though we had this movement of deinstitutionalization in this country where we don't have mental, asylums anymore, these prisons are basically becoming like that. And I think we didn't talk we just touched the surface maybe a little bit about law enforcement. And believe me, like I worked on a crisis hotline where people would call me and they were on the verge of ending their life, and there were police officers there at the scene trained to help them get them to the right place. But that's intimidating. I mean, the fact that somebody is in a crisis and we send somebody in a uniform with a gun every time, we on a systemic level, we need to look at finding people who are trained in crisis intervention, who are non-threatening, to get people connected to the right support. So I think we also need to advocate for a more comprehensive mental health program to address these issues, different strategies other than just sending the police every time there is an issue, because it's counterproductive. We've seen this time and time again played out by not just George Floyd, but Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, and others. So I'll leave it at that note, inshallah. And
I think you make a very important point, Sister Anisa, and then we'll conclude on that, is that we need to eradicate the evil institutions as a generic conversation, right? We're talking about institutional racism, which is one of the major evils on earth today. In my opinion, it's the human race shooting themselves on the foot every single day. And we're limping. But we all want to become athletes and we want to run the marathon. Okay, this is what we're doing every day. So, but you make a very important point. When we deinstitutionalize something that is bad, right? The way you had, as you said, you mentioned mental health, the way it was institutional, where people were deemed schizophrenic and then they were put on in straitjackets and couldn't get out, and they were just given, what we call a potpourri of medications, right? Just to keep the system moving. So I believe that when we deinstitutionalize something, you must have a replacement institution to push that one and bring another institution. I believe the institution of Allah that brings justice, you see, وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانِ, is the foundation of the institution of God. And when we are God conscious and we say we're going to eradicate racism, but we're going to replace it. We're not going to just eradicate. See, this is the biggest problem. It's like we find, for example, Gaddafi is a bad leader in Libya. So let's get rid of him. And then there's no system to replace. So now you have chaos, you have civil war, you have more carnage and death than ever before. And on the same policy, in the same principle, when we have an institution that's bad, we must deinstitutionalize it by creating a better institution. And I say this vociferously without any compunctions and any fear, is to say that the divine institution, not the one that's myopic, that condemns people of other faiths, but the one that promotes equity and respect for diversity and protection of all faiths on earth. Protection. Not condemnation and damnation, but protection is to me the real divine system. And I think when we all as people individually practice it piecemeal, inshallah, we will establish this as the replacement of this evil institution that exists today. I pray to Allah, inshallah. And I know Imam Mahdi alayhi salam is the one who'll put the final seal of approval and he'll make it happen, inshallah, soon. But we should start.
Brother Hassanain, I think, and we'll conclude on this point, you made a great point that not only do we need to eradicate, we need to replace. And I think this goes back to, the point that the famous clip of Martin Luther King, when he talks about how Abraham Lincoln in America, they emancipated slaves, and they, Emancipation Proclamation, they eradicated slavery, that yes, they granted slaves freedom in the sense that they no longer had to report to their masters, but they gave them no replacement. They had no land to go to. They had no, many of them were illiterate and so on and so forth. So they eradicated, but they did not replace. And that's why you find racism and this, how the Black population is still suffering the effects of just the eradication, but not having that replacement. I think Sheikh Bahmanpur actually shared that beautiful story, of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam and how he freed the African slave. But if you notice that every story that we have of the Imams freeing slaves, even the famous one where slaves, spill something on the Imam and he recites the verse, that ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين والغيظ العافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. The Imams, not only do they forgive, not only do they free, but they give the slaves, some money or some land to go upon, to build upon, to continue their lives, and not just eradicate, but also replace. And inshallah, we'll end on that note. Thank you, both Sister Anisa and Sister Fatima, for joining us. Thank you, as always, to all of our viewers for your continued participation. Inshallah, we'll continue these programs. And as you know, tomorrow night we'll be back again at the same time for our Quranic Visions program with Brother Ali Khafan and also Sheikh Bahmanpur. So inshallah, we will see you then. Thank you all. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an.
Thank you so much, sisters, for joining us. It's an honor. Sister Anisa, thank you so much for your expert advice. Sister Fatima, it's truly a blessing to have both of you. Inshallah, we'll have you join us again and continue this dialogue further. Inshallah. And, our prayers are for your success, inshallah. And we want to thank the audiences for joining us. Inshallah, we will bring about positive change, in action. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Place. And I think this goes back to